Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. I'm really excited for the gentleman that I have on today. He and I have gotten a chance to connect recently. I say recently, over the last month or so, month or two, on social media. And we're pretty much neighbors because we live in a couple cities away from each other. So one of these days we're going to get together. But he is a phenomenal guy. He's an author. He's a dad. He's a husband. He's a former NHL player that we're going to talk about. But my good friend, Billy Huard, has joined me on Dad Up. Welcome to the show, Billy.
Thanks, Bryan. Pleasure to be here, brother.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm really excited to, meet you virtually, first of all. And then you and I had been talking off the air the last few days about getting together because we're literally next door neighbors to each other in the cities that we live in, California. So I'm excited to do that. But for my listeners, my viewers, I've done a little bit of research on you. I know who you are. I know kind of your story, but I'm excited to hear you tell it. So if they don't know who you are, your backstory, let's dive into that. Kind of how you grew up, how you got into the things that you were doing. Maybe you want to mention a little bit about the enforcer if you would. That's totally up to you. But and then obviously I want to know about your kids as well.
Yeah, awesome, man. Appreciate it. So yeah, I'm from Canada originally, like most hockey players. Well, that's changing in a good way for the Americans because the talent level is so great here. But yeah, I grew up in a small town in Canada, in Ontario, and my dream as a kid was to play in the NHL, like most boys. And I had a lot of friends we all kind of shared that same dream. But I just took a different path to the NHL or in my career than a lot of folks did, a lot of players did. So I grew up in just my dad and mom were my dad owned a heating and air conditioning company. My mom was an operator, worked for Bell Canada, and my dad was a sales guy. And my dad was my best friend. I was very blessed and fortunate to have a father that really, as a salesman, my dad always carried a pen in his pocket. And when I would do something wrong in hockey and things like that, he'd always say, "So Billy, how do you think you played?" He'd never ever criticize me. And if he did, it was constructive. And he'd just say, "How do you think you played?" And I'd say, "Well, I did this and that." He'd take out his sales pen and say, "Well, you could have did this. You could have done that." So, as a young boy, I grew up, for whatever reason, I was really insecure and I was kind of a mama's boy. And one day they thought, well, maybe we did something's happening, So they brought me to the doctor, and I write about this in my book. And Dr. Alexander at the time, he called my dad in and said, there's nothing wrong with him, because I was having some issues and little anxiety. He goes, "What you need to do is just be more positive with him. And if he makes mistakes, and not that my dad was hard on me at all, but it was just as a young boy," he said, "then just pick your battles and little things." And from that day on, my dad just affirmed that and was full of positive influence in my life. And I'll get into it in a little bit on where that kind of stopped and why it stopped. But so I grew up and wanting to be a hockey player. Unfortunately for me, I was a late bloomer, so I went to hard, never got drafted. I went to the NHL draft and never got drafted. And around the 11th round, I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting up in the stands with my dad, and I said, "We're not leaving here without something." And they announced a name, and I walked down it was in Detroit, the Joe Louis, and I walked down. So when you picture an NHL draft, you have the draft floor, it's all carpeted, you have all the tables set up, all the NHL teams' flags are there, and the owners, the managers. And by the 12th round, it's almost echoing in there, right?
Right.
Nowadays, the NHL goes 7 rounds. So anyways, I got up and walked down, and my dad's like, "Where are you going?" And the security guard at the floor, because they let fans into this, they let the hometown fans in, to cheer for their. He thought I had got drafted, so I had my suit on, and all my friends were drafted already. They're in the first and second round. So I walked by on the draft floor. I walked over to the New York Rangers to Phil Esposito because I did a skating camp with him that summer. And I said, "Mr. Esposito, it's Billy Huard." And everybody at the Rangers table looked up and thought, "Wow, did we draft this guy? This wasn't even our draft. We didn't." Anyways, I said, "Mr. Esposito." And for those who don't know who Phil Esposito is, he's a Hall of Fame, incredible hockey player, legend, like Gordie Howe. And he was a general manager at the time. And I introduced myself, and I don't know. He's kind of like, "Who are you?" I said, "Billy Huard. Remember I met?" "Oh yeah, Billy. How are you?" Phil, he's all full of it. "Oh, Bill, nice." I said, "Really, I just come down here to get a tryout. If we can get a tryout, I'd like to have a tryout with the Rangers." And he goes, "You got it, kid." So, and he said, reach out to me. Here's my number. Reach out to me. And I went back and I walk up the stairs and my dad's a big man. He's 6'4", just a big dude. Like he could be intimidating. And I walked up and my dad's looking at me like, what the heck? What did you just do? And I said, I got what we came for. Let's go home and tell mom. There were no cell phones back then. So that's kind of how my journey went. I went to that camp and I did good, but I played in Canada. I played junior A hockey in Canada, which is what we all do back then. Either there's two things in hockey. You can go the college route or you can go junior. And I went the junior route. But that's kind of how it went. As I continued my journey through the NHL, I had my three sisters. I got three older sisters who all supported me. And of course, my folks supported me. But as my journey went, it got harder and harder because I grew up wanting to be Wayne Gretzky. I wanted to be the goal scorer. I grew up playing on a frozen pond. Right. But what happened was I didn't really have the skill set. When you get to a certain level in any sport, you're being challenged by the greatest players in the world. And I mean, Sweden, you're talking about Sweden, Czechoslovakia, Russia, Finland, and hockey's everywhere, much like a lot of other sports. So you really had to fit into a certain role. And by that point, I was big and I was physical. And fighting was a huge part of the game back then, more than it is now. So I kind of got fit in that role. But my mindset was never there. I didn't really know what that entailed. And that's what I wanted to go back to at the beginning, Bryan, when we were talking, is my dad helped me only up to where he couldn't help me. Because he'd be like, why don't you just play the game? And I'm like, well, they don't want me just to play the game. That's not how I'm going to make it that's not how this dream ends in hockey. And that's what I really struggled with. And I'll share a little more about that, but that's kind of my backstory, so far.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're right. I mean, dads get to a point, because I coached my boys all through high school, from the ages of 4 all the way up through high school playing basketball. And they played basketball, baseball, and football. But when they got to the high school level, it was a lot different because it was very, you're not talking about rec ball anymore. You're talking about legit, high school teams that you have to try out for and compete on to make the team, to just make the team. But once you advance to that, like I was at a point with my boys, it's like once they advance to the college level, my younger son played college basketball and I didn't know how to coach him at the college level. It's like, it's a completely different, I can just imagine the pros, but it's a completely different level than high school. And I just, I try to be just an encourager as much as possible and provide at least what advice I could to help him get a little bit better, but I couldn't coach him. I'm like, I've never played at college level sport before. I've played all throughout high school, but that's it. I don't have much other experience other than what you're doing already. So I can imagine your dad feeling that way. Look, I don't know what else to teach you. I can give you some advice, but I don't know what else to teach you. How did you feel about that when he was kind of telling you, I don't know what else to tell you?
Well, he really didn't come out and say it. It was just something that happened because it wasn't so much but I do want to say you're right with what you did with your son, because I have a son playing Division I hockey as well. And I'm more on the mental side like you are. I'm encouraging him why, if he's not playing or if he's playing or if he misses. It's more that side of it. The game's changed so much since I played, and I played at the NHL. I played above him, and I still can't. I can't get. Plus, he's a defenseman, and he just kind of laughs if I start. I notice things, but the game's changed. So it's like, hey, we're flying out to buy you dinner. A good game, and he knows. They know. Your son knows as well when they didn't play a good game.
Yeah,
but I can't help him. But my father, first, my dad never, he played travel hockey, but only up to a certain age because he had polio in his one leg. But my dad really, where he couldn't help me the most, Bryan, was on the mental side because he didn't understand what I was going through on the mental side, because the anxiety and the buildup to a fight is much different than the fight. It's harder than the fight. So, and I didn't grow up wanting to be a UFC fighter. So when people sometimes compare hockey to I'm like, no, they're two different animals. If I grown up that way, I would have been prepared that way. I grew up on a frozen pond wanting to put the puck in the net and raise my hands and win the Stanley Cup, right? I didn't want to square off in front of 18,000 people and get my nose broken or my cheek or my jaw broken every night, you know?
Yeah.
So that anxiety, Dad couldn't help me with that. So that's where in my life, it sent me into a terrible turn spin of dealing with that depression later on in life with PTSD and things like that, just from the concussions and things that I had. But I signed up for it. It wasn't hockey's problem. That's the way hockey was. And I got paid good to do that. You know, I got paid well to do that. And I provided to our team what they needed the most, which was to have an enforcer on the ice, someone to protect them, someone to let the goal scorers be free to score goals, with the others knowing, look, if we mess with those guys, this guy's coming out. So when and I don't know how familiar you or your audience is with hockey, but let me explain this to you. And what's crazy, until my book come out, a lot of Canadians didn't know this as well. So when you're an enforcer in the NHL, you're usually one or two on your team and one or two on the other team. So your goal as an enforcer, because nobody's crazy about doing it, is if we can keep the game close, then everybody's happy, right? Then I don't have to go out and crack my hands over your head, and you don't have to break my nose. And we can play some minutes, which is what we kind of wanted to do since we were 5, and let's get through the game. So we'll go into, let's say I'm with the Dallas Stars and we go to St. Louis, and in the first period, we're up 4-0. Now I'm like, okay,
something's going to happen.
Yeah, something's going down, and it's me. I'm involved in this, and I know that guy, and the same would happen if St. Louis came into Dallas. I'd be on the ice, or if I was in St. Louis, or let's say Detroit, I'm on the ice, and Stu Grimson's playing for Detroit. I'd hear 18,000 fans. I wouldn't even have to look over. I would hear, Stu, he's coming out. That's his job, right? So we would just want to get the fight over with. So many people are like, God, these fighters in hockey, they talk, they're laughing after the fight, they're talking in the penalty, because we're just like, okay, it's over. We did our job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sometimes the momentum of a game would swing, you know, sometimes it would, because if I do really, you know, if I knocked them out, our team gets picked up, we score a couple of goals. But more times than not, it was great entertainment for the fans. But most times the fans didn't know that the guys fighting were going through what they were going through. And that's kind of what I went through in my life and my journey, you know, and making it, you know, and then I went, and then to deal with that. So when you're, you know, it's not easy when you're fighting and you're fighting in front of 18,000 people and you go home and you go to put your kids to sleep. And you got to tell, you know, turning it off. It's kind of like those character actors. Turning it off and turning it on became more and more difficult. Pretty soon, the hardness inside, you know, pretty soon you become that person. I can see for a role in a movie, if you're filming a movie, you probably can be that person for a year or so. You know, you have to. But in hockey, in 12 years of playing, you become that person full time after the first few years. Then you're approaching a fight like, I don't want to fight you. I want to knock your head off your shoulders. And then it doesn't start with that guy. Then the collateral damage is the short fuse, the stress, the anxiety. Then it's your wife, not physically, but I mean, you're not who you used to be. Right. You're not that loving husband or father that most times we had our high school sweethearts and things like that back in the day, you know, and you just change and you don't see it. You can't find a way out. For me, it was Coors Light. You know, we all drank Coors Light. I drank more than others, because I just couldn't go to my hotel room after a game and sit there, because I'm looking at my hand that's in an ice bucket, knowing we're 2 games from now, we're playing another team with 2 more tough guys. That was my life as a hockey player, which I signed up for. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying that was my story as a hockey player.
Yeah. I've got a couple questions for you that are kind of off talking about that, but then I want to get into what you just mentioned there about alcohol and the impact and the effects that it had on you, because we have very similar backgrounds in that, and I'll explain. But number one, when I watch a hockey game, whether I'm at a hockey game in person or on TV, it's always entertaining when you see the fights happen, right? That's, I mean, especially when you're in person, you just hear the crowd just goes nuts.
Right.
You know, it's like, okay, there's a fight on the playground. We got to all gather around and watch, right? And cheer them on, cheer them on. I have a question though. When it comes to that, I've always wondered this. When it comes to the fights, why do the refs allow the officials allow the fight to go on until they fall down? Why aren't they breaking it up right away? Why isn't there like, the officials coming in and just pushing them away?
Yeah. I mean, they're told to stay out so they don't get hurt.
Okay.
Because we're throwing bombs. And if a ref just, I mean, think of how thin the skate blade is. If a ref's in there and he's got two people pulling at each other and front punches are coming from everywhere and it's awkward, then he could either fall, get stepped on. It's kind of like when you send your kids figures or send your kids public skating when they're young, you're like, don't hold on to your friend. My daughter did it and sliced her wrist. Don't hold on to your friend, because if she falls, you're falling. And it's kind of the same thing in hockey. That is, they're told stay out. When they get tired, get in and separate them, because guys are, or if it gets lopsided, they'll jump in right away. But most times hockey guys, if I get lopsided on a guy, I'm going to back off. You know what I mean? Towards the end of my career, I wasn't, but for the most part, you're going to back off. And don't let, and the other thing, Bryan, is fighting should still be part of hockey. I think it's a huge part of hockey, because you can't eliminate it, because there's just such a high intense game, and there's so much speed, and it's so physical. The thing that I had an issue with was was signing fighters just to fight. They weren't hockey players. They were guys that, I was a hockey player. I'm fighting a guy that just finished boxing, and he made it. They signed him for whoever, the Calgary Flames. He's a liability. He can't play 3 minutes a night. But when I'm on the ice, he's coming after me. So that was the issue I had to deal with, was why are these guys, they couldn't play in the American Hockey League, which is one league below, because you're only allowed 10 forwards. You couldn't have those 2 extra spots. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But anyways, to answer your question, that's why the referees stay out. They just don't want them to get hurt.
Interesting. The other thing I want to ask you, as someone who is known as an enforcer on a team, what you talked about it briefly. I mean, you mentioned it very briefly, but I want to go back to it. You had mentioned about how hockey players, they get into these scuffs and then they're sitting there chit-chatting and BSing with each other. That was kind of the way it went, right? There was I'm sure there was probably guys that didn't like each other or just had grudges against each other, but I'm pretty sure that most of the time it was just like, hey, this is our job. Hey, Billy, you and I are best friends, but we got to fight this game. So it's going to go down. And then after the game, we're going to go buy each other a beer and call it a day.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So that was pretty common. That was pretty regular.
Yeah. I mean, let's not forget, we were all on teams leading up to that. So I may have played with the guy, in junior.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I know these guys. I mean, when I fought Ty Domi in Toronto Maple Leaf against the Leafs, my parents were in his Sky Suite. You know what I mean? It's like we played together in Peterborough. Like, that's the way it went. Like, that's how it went. Now, to your point, though, there were guys that you really, and don't forget, as fighters, we're not fighting our fight. A lot of times things happen on the ice. We got to build ourselves up for it. So if you're not that person, you have to build yourself up to be that person. So at 4, it starts days before the game. It's not just like, oh, I just dropped the gloves. No, I got the Vaseline on. I'm pumping ephedrine. I have to be in that zone. If you don't enter that
ring, that's awesome.
If you're not in that zone, you're going to get hurt. Wow. So when you're in a dressing room, the power play guys go off with the coaches. They tell them, here's how, for those of your listeners who understand hockey, there's a power play. The other team takes a penalty. You have the man advantage. There's certain plays you work on, and vice versa. Your penalty killers, if that team's on a power play, you have your 4 guys you want to put out there that can hopefully stop them. I would sit there. I was never part of those groups. Right. I had my own group. I watched fight films. I studied guys. And then I had to build up the anger. So during that day, when my roommate, for instance, Mike Badano, all-star Hall of Famer, making $7 million a year, he's snoring in the afternoon. I'm staring up at the ceiling going, okay, this guy throws left. I know if I tie up his left, it's going to be like this is, and that's the part. That's That's the part that was painful.
That
And
is
then,
so fascinating, Billy. That, I mean, I don't
yeah,
mean to cut you off, but that is fascinating the way you're explaining that, because here you are, a hockey player. You're a hockey player. You're not a boxer. You're
right.
not a, like you said, an MMA fighter. And yet you're studying guys, not how they play hockey, but how they fight.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's kind of, and that's the sad part, and that's how my story, and when I write about it in my book, that's why my book, A Purpose Worth Fighting For, let's face it, in life, everybody loves a Cinderella story, right? They all love a comeback. When I leave this earth, I'm thinking, boy, am I going to leave the earth that, I played hockey, I was an enforcer, and I made it, where, 99.99% of players will never make it to the level I made it to. Great story, but that's not the story I want to leave. The story I want to leave is, and not even the story, because I think everybody has a gift, a God, everybody's like, oh, you're gifted. God's gifted you with hockey. He did, but that was only one part of it for me.
Right.
There's another part, and that was the part people always want to hear how you made it to, the draft story I told you. My first NHL game, I was 6 years in the minors. I got called up to the NHL. I was just about to take my shift. I had to leave the game. There was a face-off in Hartford. The referee's arm went up. Ray Bork, who's a Hall of Famer, went down, talked to the ref. The ref came to our coach, and I just got called up. And my first game after 7 years, Bryan Sutter says, Huey, you're going to have to leave the ice. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is my first shift. You get one shift, you made it to the NHL. I don't care what it is. I had to leave the game. And the first person I called on the payphone was my dad. And my dad's like, my dad's favorite saying in life was, this too shall pass. He goes, I don't know why, but this too shall pass, Billy. But I'm just sharing that with you because I had an amazing story on how I made it. I finally did get called up. But what if I go down to the minors and get hurt and never play a game? Imagine that story, right? So, but what I went through with the alcohol and then the anxiety and then post hockey, having, I sold a company, was in great spirits, then started having breakdowns and things like that. I think what I want to share with people is those times, what I went through, that anxiety. What did that anxiety feel like? Because I can tell you what, Bryan, you might not realize, you might not relate to me in that day of the fight or make it to the NHL. But I tell you what, you will relate to me when you talk about it, when I talk about the anxiety. And depending on your story, about the alcohol and the fear of change, because the fear of change nothing happens until the pain exceeds the fear. And in my life, it was the fear of change and the pain finally exceeding the fear. And I always had a question when I retired from the NHL, and you pointed to it perfectly. You're like, you're not a fighter, you're a hockey guy. When I retired from the NHL, I struggled with that. I struggled with that. I'm like, why me? Why did it have to be me? And then I went through, when you retire from the NHL and it's been your life, it's like your heart getting ripped out. That's your nucleus. Right. You have to figure out your life. That's how I end up in California. And that's for another story. But I just think that people have to understand that when I was suffering with, and alcohol, I'm not going to lie, alcohol got me through my career. But it got me through until it couldn't get me through, because I didn't know what else. I didn't have faith. I didn't have any of that. I always tell people now. So I had two things happen to me when I was down and out. I lost a business. I was rock bottom, but I could still, I forget I quote, but make sure you land on your back so you can look up. Because if you can look up, you can get up. I quoted him. But anyways, I picked up a book called The Evangelist, written about Billy Graham. And I read that book, and it was about forgiveness. It was about all the greatest things in life, and about the Bible and about Billy Graham and how, how we're meant to live, how we're supposed to live. And I'm just like reading this and I'm absorbing it. My wife forever was like, let's go to church. I'm like, I don't have time for church. But anyways, that book changed my life. And then I had another experience when I had MRSA. I was watching my son in North Dakota. He was playing in the USHL. I got MRSA in my foot, and they had every doctor in the world there trying to help me because they didn't know what it was. And anyways, I was 10 days in ICU, and I made another pact. I said, God, and I was just planning a trip to Dallas because I'm a business development guy. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm a mover, and I'm a shaker. And I just had everything planned in Dallas. We are going to go watch the stars. I had this big suite and everything, and just doing the same crap, not afraid to put that other foot in, and I just said, God, I don't know, why I'm here, but like, speak to me, help me. What I'm yours, just pick me. I was so desperate because it was just my son coming in. I didn't have family there. I was in a hospital in Fargo. And it was just like a peace came over me. And just like that, about 2 days later, my foot got better. I got out. It was October 26th. I never drank a day since then, but more, and as importantly, it changed my life. It changed my life because one step leads to another step, which leads to another step. And then pretty soon you're changed, and it's not easy. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And it took me for years and years because alcohol was my friend. It helped me deal with that anxiety. And when I had concussions and I was suffering some nervous breakdowns, like I said earlier, we had sold the company. And at the same time, we were having a lawsuit with the NHL at the time for concussions. Remember that movie came out, things like that. Well, we got in that mix, and I signed up for the lawsuit not for financial reasons, but just for health reasons. If something happens to me, or I want to get to the best doctors, and we settled with the lawsuit. But as soon as that happened, I got to see one of the best neurologists around, and I got diagnosed properly medically, and he said, thank God you quit drinking, this is what you have. And I was able to get on that, and that started the whole holistic, my cold tub, my breathing, it took me down a whole different path. And that's why we're talking today. So I guess I would say to a lot of your listeners who are struggling or have that one foot in, and they just know they can, they have a purpose worth fighting for. Just don't give up that fight, because if you ever get that other foot in, and when you do that, your life will change. And I wrote about it in a blog. The greatest thing a dad can do is invest in himself. Fix you, because look at our kids, man. You know how moms have that love. And it's just that mom's love. We've all had it. And for those who haven't, I don't take it for granted, but we've all had, whether it's been a little tough love or love, but we've had that love. But a dad, you're always looking in the stands. You always want that. And we know that's a huge problem in America. But for those who are listening to your podcast, just know that if you can fix you, everything else just falls into place.
I love that. And I'm 100% behind you on that, believe in that as well. I have said, and I've not only through the podcast, but when I've had various events that I've spoken at, or even the dads that I've coached, I have clients that I coach about how to be a better dad and how to really build a relationship with their kids. It's one of the first things I like to hit on is, hey, before we start working on your relationship with your kids or your spouse, I want to work on you. Because if you aren't right, how in the world are we going to be able to make that relationship right? We need to fix what you're feeling or going through right now. And one of those things that you mentioned there for you was, the struggle with alcohol and alcoholism and the impact it had on you. You said alcohol was my friend. Alcohol wasn't your friend, Billy. You thought alcohol was your friend. It was your escape. And what you thought, that escape caused you to feel like, hey, this is my friend because he's helping me through something. He wasn't helping you through something. He was giving you a Band-Aid. And then once that Band-Aid was ripped off, it was right back to where you were at before. And then you had to resort to putting on a new Band-Aid or drinking alcohol. For me, it was the same thing. I grew up in an alcoholic family. I had a loving family. My parents were very loving. They weren't super involved in my life because they were blue collar workers. They worked a lot of hours. But my parents were very loving towards me, but I had an alcoholic dad, and I was around it. I was around that kind of environment. And then I go off into the military, and I talk about this all the time because it's just my joke that I say about the military is they teach me how to cuss. The military taught me how to kill or fight, and the military taught me how to drink. And that's what I did. Those are the things that I did in the military, and it carried. I coached my boys through all their sports that they ever played from 4 to high school. I had a very productive, very successful career. I had a very loving wife that our relationship is just as strong as it has ever been. So I was a functioning alcoholic. But it took control of my life, and it took me to a point where my boys were witnessing the alcohol. I was asking my son one day to get me a beer out of the fridge when he was 8 years old. And I'm thinking, what in the hell am I doing? What am I teaching him? I grew up in that. Why would I want him to grow up in that? And I made a shift. I knew I had to fix something. And that was that fixing myself. I had to fix myself in order to be a better dad for my kids, in order to be a better husband for my wife, and in order to be a better person overall. I needed to fix myself, and that meant getting rid of alcohol. And I did that. I literally stopped cold turkey, boom, haven't been back for over 14 years now. And that was my life. And that's what I'm trying to preach to other dads is, look, you need to, like you said, you need to fix yourself before you can really work on other things. And for you in particular, Billy, you knew that, you recognized that at a very young age. For you recognized that and knew that you had to do that for your family. Were your kids impacted by your struggles with anxiety and alcoholism? Were they impacted by that?
They weren't with alcoholism, but they were with anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I wasn't diagnosed. I didn't know what it was. And then you read about it and PTSD, right. And just, yeah, they were in that, but not in a way that affected them really. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, you know what? That'd probably be a better question for my wife than me, because sometimes we're blinded to that. She may be like, oh yeah, I remember this. Because if you can't fix, for instance, some of your listeners may say, well, man, I don't struggle with alcohol. I got my crap together. But maybe you're a control freak. Maybe you're over controlling. And you know what? When you're over controlling people are over angry people. Mm-hmm. They're the people that take it to the top on both sides. So maybe you're struggling with that. It doesn't have to be an addiction. Whatever you think about the most controls you. Yeah. So if I'm thinking of going to Cook's Corners up the road on Sunday, mm-hmm. Then that's what's controlling me, and so I just think that for a lot of folks, for a lot of guys, that fixing you is so important. And here's what I said in my book, you don't have to know your mentor to have mentors. They're all over the internet, man. There's guys, Laird Hamilton, Cam Haines, there's all kinds of guys out there on podcasts and that are just spewing positive things. They can be your mentor. And I mentioned a bunch of them in my book. They can be your mentor. You don't have to know them, man. Just listen to them. They've lived that life. And most of these guys have made it. It's not about that. It's what we're doing. It's about giving back. It's like, here's who I was. Here's, and that to me is everything. So you just don't. And then the other thing is explore. Like for me, it's wilderness. That's my calling. I know when I was a kid with my BB gun at 9 years old, when I was in the woods, probably shouldn't have been killing squirrels, but I was back in the day. That was my happy place. And I'll tell you what, when I have head issues or I'm going through stuff now, my wife knows I got an off-road trailer. I go, man, I'm gone. I'm in the Sierras with my 2 blue healers. I'm sitting in a cold river, doing a cold tank, and I come back rejuvenate. I'm not going to the bar anymore. You know what I mean? Right. I'm on my paddle board. And that's what I want guys to know, that it can be cool. Just because you think you have to be somebody you're not to get through this meeting, to get this bit. It's such BS. It's such a lie. Yeah. You don't, man. You're wired for so much more than that.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. I think that, there's mentors all around us. One of the things that I do personally is I have an actual personal board of directors, and these are a group of 7 guys that actually report to me, that help me in all areas of my life. They don't get paid to do it. They're doing it as a volunteer service, basically, but they had to sign a contract to do it. And we've had that board of directors going now for almost 3 years. And guess what? It originally started to help me. I said, this is what you're going to do for me. If you agree to this and sign this contract, then we can move forward. And they all did. But now here we are almost 3 years later, in this board of directors, we meet every other month and we talk about me. But guess what? All 7 of the other guys that are in there are all growing from the experience as well. They're all learning from each other as well. Even though they're directing the conversation towards me, they're all learning and growing as well. So it's benefiting all of us. I like to talk about therapy a lot. I'm a huge advocate for therapy in our personal development. And one of the things that I do personally is I have a therapist that I see regularly. I have a hypnotherapist that I go see regularly to help keep me centered in who I am and who I'm supposed to be. And that's something that especially dads, put the ego aside, get the damn chip off your damn shoulder, and start doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself, take care of your life, because you're going to impact your family in some way. And why not be a positive, impact on them instead of a negative? Your kids are older. How old are your kids right now, Billy?
26, 22, and 20.
Okay. So, they're adults now. My two boys are 24 and 22. So they're adults now. They just need guidance and support from you. They don't need anything else, right? But imagine if Billy didn't go through the transformation that he went through as a man. Imagine what kind of relationship you would have with them right now if you didn't go through that transformation. It probably wouldn't be very strong. The bond probably wouldn't be very, very strong.
It isn't, Bryan. It wouldn't be. And let me share this with you. Two things. I got to write the one thing down because it's permission. One big thing you said about your group is so important. And every one of your folk, every one of the guys listening, you need to know this. You need to have people in your life that you give permission to. And they have the permission to step into your life, and you need to talk to them. It's not, hey, how you doing? I'm doing awesome, man. How you doing? It's not that. You have to give them, there has to be, you have your board of directors. You have a board of guys that you're saying, I'm giving you permission. And they're saying, we trust you. You're giving us permission to intervene in your life where it's a positive thing. And I have that too. I have guys that they have permission to say, hey, man, too much. Hey, you shouldn't have said that. You were out of line. We're all imperfect people, right? So just because you've found faith in this and that, you sin less. You're not sinless. You're still going to open your mouth when you're not supposed to, right? So that's the first part. The second part, and I'll tell you why this is crucial, and I'm glad you brought it up. I wouldn't have forgot it, but I would have came to it. Had I not had faith in my life, had faith not intervened or intersected in my life, I would never have had the confidence to start a company and run a company and exit a company, to go into meetings where I have my high school education. I'm not a college, you know what I'm saying? Right. And I know people, but I'm just saying that weighed on me. That was an insecurity of mine. And I wasn't a 50 goal scorer, so I didn't come out of the NHL a millionaire, right? But faith intervened. And there isn't a time that in my life that I don't do anything. Even before this podcast, I always say, God, I don't know how this is going to go, but you got my back every second. And why that's important is if that didn't happen to me, I can't tell my kids that. I can't share that with them. I can't say, hey, to my son in hockey, hey, buddy, there's a bigger picture to this. We don't know why this door shut, but another one's going to open. I didn't have that. I didn't know that. And more importantly, as a fighter in the NHL, when my dad couldn't be there for me, had I had faith, I would have said, God, I don't know why this is my role. I don't know why I'm doing this, but I know one thing, there's a reason for it. And it's for a purpose for you. And I don't know why, and I tell people now, I would have been tougher now than I would have been then, knowing that I had a purpose. Right. And it was my purpose. It was just not the one I thought it was. That's why I said it's a twofold story. I was gifted to make it, but it didn't just end there. So when I talk to my daughter or even my wife, she's worried my daughter's in Europe. Babe, have faith. This is trusting God. Things are going to go. And I'm not last thing I don't want people to think is, oh my God, some Bible thing. That's not me, guys. Just so your audience knows, dude, I can mountain bike and dirt bike, and I have the coolest friends in the world. I just live each day trying to help be a better dad, be a better father, be a better husband. And I'm doing what works for me. And I think what works for so many other guys that take that next step.
Yeah. My episode isn't necessarily a faith-based episode. My show, I should say, is not a faith-based show, but
Right.
I'm big in my faith. I have a great relationship with my Lord. I've got a freaking Bible right here next to
Yeah.
me. My two boys have a great relationship with the Lord. I was just in Arizona visiting my son for the weekend, and we went to his church yesterday on Sunday. He goes to church every Sunday morning. He is 5 hours away from me, living on his own, and still goes to church as a 22-year-old college kid who should be partying it up and having a blast, which, don't get me wrong, he does,
Yeah.
but he still goes to church every week. And he wanted to take us to his church that we'd never been. That kind of stuff is cool to me. And that's yes. So I'm not a faith-based show, but there's still room for it. And when we have, I'm a firm believer, when I have my heavenly Father, like you said, on my side, or he's got my back, everything's going to be okay. And one of the things that my therapist has said to me is, when I say things are going cruddy, when I say things are not aligning right, when I say I'm stressed out, or I have anxiety, or I'm really worried about this or that, my therapist says, you got to change your thought process. Instead of starting to think the way, when something's happening to you, instead of thinking negative about whatever's happening to you, I want you to just change a couple words in your head. And what he's told me was, it's actually brilliant, because it actually helps, is he says, when something happens that's wrong, or you don't like, or it hurts, or it's frustrating or stressful, I want you to say, that's about right. So when something happens and it goes wrong, you just say, that's about right. And then you move forward and fix it, whatever you need to do to get it straight. It's just something that I do. I love it. It just helps me. Hey, the guy cut me off on the freeway coming back home last night, cut me off. I was really irritated. I was fired up, and I just went, that's about right.
Love it. I love that. I'm going to use that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I really do. Because you can think, we always do, visualization's huge in life. We know that. When you wake up in the morning and you have your quiet time and you visualize how great your day is going to go, sometimes it doesn't go that way. And to your point, I love that. I love that. Thanks for sharing, because that's life, man. Let's face it. In our life, we're going to spend maybe 20% on the peaks, 80% in the valleys, guys.
Right.
80% in the valleys. And that's where this is what your podcast is all about.
Yeah.
But to your point, if we can help young dads, and hey, I did a blog yesterday, and I got a response from a gentleman that I've known forever, and he's my dad's age, and says, this is something I've worked on my whole life. So don't think necessarily it's just a young dad either. It's like, oh my gosh, because we're all imperfect people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like marriage. It's like for the first 2 months, for opposites attract, and then 2 years into a marriage, opposites attack. It's like, it happens, right? Because people try changing people. It's not going to happen, but it's just the way it is. I just think it's so important that we understand, and we take our own inventory, and have the folks that can help you, that have permission to step in and intervene, whether it's, hey, we've done, me and my wife, marriage counseling. Thank God for marriage counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God for therapy. So that's what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
And, and to me, and mine I did faith-based marriage counseling, and I did just because that's my journey I'm on, but definitely I think counseling, there is no self-help. There's no such thing as self-help.
We can try.
You can try, but to me, self-help is like saying, whatever, there's a cookie jar. I'm not going to have a cookie. There's no way I'm going to eat that cookie. I don't want that cookie. I'm not going to eat that cookie. Boy, this cookie tastes good. It's like this, right? I'm not going to go to that bar. I'm not going to, that's what I tell, guys that I counsel. I'm like, when, whatever they're struggling with, pornography, there's different guys, when they go on the road, it's a road trip in business. And I'm like, dude, there's always somebody watching you. There's somebody high in the sky watching you. Like, you're not pulling the wool over anybody. You need to change, because I'll tell you right now, you're not, if you want to talk about karma and all that, you're not going to get that when you're doing what you're doing. Good things happen to good people. And nobody's doing it in secret, because I see the same folks on church on Sunday screaming at the kids at the soccer field.
Right.
Later on that afternoon. It's like, did you learn anything?
Right. I love that. It's funny you bring up marriage counseling because my wife and I we have a marriage counselor. She's a licensed therapist. We call her our marriage coach, and we see her every month. And we've been seeing her every month for the last 4, maybe 5 years now. And my wife and I enjoy it. We love going. And sometimes we just go and we just chit chat. But a lot of times we're still working on things with each other when it comes to communication and affection and just various areas. My wife and I don't have any problems. We have no marriage problems at all.
Yeah.
But we go so we don't have those problems. We don't have those issues.
You're proactive.
It's a constant work in progress. And when it comes to us as dads, we talked in the very beginning about working on ourselves to make ourselves better because we can't help other people unless we're working on ourselves. It's the same thing with a marriage and a family. I talk about it in my show and I talk about it with my dads that I coach. It's like, you need to make sure that you and your wife's foundation of your guys' marriage is strong and stable before you can start working on the things in the relationships with your kids or your business or any of those things. If there's cracks in that foundation, everything else around it is going to crumble. Trust me. So you need to make sure there's no cracks in that foundation. That foundation is the family structure between you and, the relationship between you and your wife.
Your kids watch everything. From when their eyes are open, they're watching everything. So how you treat your wife is everything to them. It's how your daughter is going to want to be treated when she gets older.
Mm-hmm.
It's how your kids are going to, it's how your sons are going to treat their wives. That to me is top of the list. Yeah. That's fix yourself and work on yourself. And you're just not going to fix yourself, to your point. And I love what you said. Not counselors, coaches. They're all coaches. I like that word. If it was coaches, people are less afraid to go to them.
Right.
It's like, and I love marriage counseling where there's two of us going, because when I slip up, she reminds me of what we talked about. It wasn't, you know what I mean? So we can catch each other. So when we do have struggles, it's like, oh my gosh, you're right. And then we have fun with it too. It's like we're going in, we're like, oh God, well, I didn't get beat up as bad as you did. It's just, we make it part of it.
we do that. We do that too. We tease each other afterwards as well. But yeah, she's our marriage coach. And like I said, she's a licensed therapist. She's a licensed family therapist, but she's our coach, and our boys know it. I've told our boys, hey, mom and I have our coaching session this weekend. So we're going to be busy at this time. So if you need us, you're going to have to do it before or wait till after. Our boys know that we go to a marriage coach. So yeah, very important. I got 2 more questions for you. I'm going to let you go because I've taken a lot of your time and I know you're busy. When it comes to kids, maybe high school, maybe college, whatever the case may be, when it comes to those kids that want to be a professional athlete of some sort, whether it's hockey, baseball, football, whatever the case may be, parents sometimes struggle with that relationship between their child and a professional sport. What advice could you give to maybe parents that maybe really either pushing their kids too hard or not encouraging them enough? What advice could you give to parents out there that may have kids that, hey, their dream is to be a professional athlete of some sort?
I would say, there's a lot of answers for that. I would say, first of all, if you're vicariously living through your kid, don't do it. If you always wanted to be a hockey player and it's now, and your dad never had the funds, but you now have the funds. I coached hockey in California here where everybody had the funds, but nobody understood the sport. Right. They thought because they had money, oh, my kid can make it. But I would say each one of your children are completely different. First of all, your child's going to want, they have to want it. Okay. And I'll give you an example. My son was 15 sitting at this table I'm at right now, and he had a chance to go play in Canada in a prep school, which is expensive, in Canada, but it got him, he was going to play at the best level, and it was his opportunity. He had to go if he wanted to be, but he always wanted to play hockey. I never put him in hockey. My wife did. Remember what I said? I was done with the sport.
Right.
I came home one night and one day my son had rollerblades on. I told my wife, I'm like, well, what are you doing? Where are we going with this? Right. So when my son gets interviewed now, they're like, how'd you get hockey? Oh, your dad played. And he's like, No, actually, my mom did. You know, I didn't want that. I was so sick of it because I wasn't healed yet. I was like I was just starting to ferment. But, and we made a decision. I said, Colton, if you want it bad enough, I'll commit to this. Because I said, but it's not so much me you have to convince, it's your mom. And he's like, where's she? I said, she's out in the Tahoe right now with her hands on the steering wheel crying because you're leaving home at 15. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
You have to have, if your son or daughter has that commitment and you sense it, now you also have to know what the sport is. And if you're looking at it going, well, oh, my son's going to get a scholarship and that, totally the wrong way. I mean, the percentage it's like a business. Do your research. Don't get into business without doing your research. I tell so many retired hockey players that want to invest their money. I'm like, dude, do me a favor. Go work in that industry for 2 years first before you spend a dime. And you tell me after that if you want to get in that industry. It's the same in hockey. It's the same in hockey. Understand the realism of what it takes to make it at that level. Right. I don't ever want to crush someone's dream, though, because my dad always said I could do it. And I had in my book, you'll read Purpose Worth Fighting For, there was a person that tried to crush my dream. I don't have the dad I have, or Bryan, you're not the father you are, then who knows what, if I was a single mom, who knows what would have happened, you know? So to answer your question, I would say you have to understand the abilities of your son or daughter, and not as they are as a 10-year-old, but how are they evolving as an athlete? Are they getting better? Are they the same? And you never have to steal their thunder. However, I would be careful because there's so many sharks out there that want them to play club this, club that, private lessons this, private lessons that, and they're throwing thousands. Before you know it, you could have put your kid through Princeton by the time you're done trying to get him a D1 scholarship. Right. So not only that, I've known a lot of hockey players, not a lot, but a handful of hockey players that as soon as they made it, and I know one that won a Hobie Baker that just quit hockey, couldn't take it because
he was burned out.
The pressure from his father.
Yeah.
So hockey, when I talk about my career, and I know I'm going a little long, but when I talk about my career, hockey's this much of it, man. Like the NHL was 7 years. I was about 15 years, 20, but in relevance to life, it's so small, it's so minute. There's so much after. So that's what I tell people when they're struggling and their kids aren't going to make it. And their dads are just like, dude, I thought he was going to make it. He got drafted in the first round in the NHL, blah, blah, and he was the guy. And that dream never happened. I'm like, dude, that's okay. Right. It was meant to be that way. Don't, it's time to move on. And how do you move on? And that's where the journey begins. But that's what parents have to understand. Yeah. But even if they make it and they made millions, who cares? It's irrelevant to who they are as human beings, right?
Yeah, it's just a small segment of their life.
It really is. Like, for me, looking back, it seems like a pipe dream. Like when people are like, oh my God, the NHL. I'm like, dude, that was so long ago that was for the moment, but that's so long ago. I utilize it as my purpose in what I'm doing now for all the reasons, but I'm not the guy that's going to sit in the bar and drink beer and talk fight stories and tell you about the old time. I don't do that.
Yeah, I get that. It's funny when I've coached all thousands of kids in various sports. I have coached, and I have coached against tons of other coaches, competed at a coaching level, competed against tons of other coaches. And those coaches are dads of kids that are on that team. And I can see it, the way that those coaches, they're living through their kids' eyes. And I always knew that I told my wife, I go, I can tell you right now, his kid's going to be burned out by the time he's 15 years old. He's going to be burned out. And I never once pressured my kids to play sports. I always told them, you got to do something. It could be band, it could be acting, you got to do something extra besides school just to keep you active. My boys just gravitated towards sports. But when my older son didn't really care to play after high school, my younger son wanted to play college basketball, and he was fortunate enough to get a scholarship. You're right. This percentage just from the high school level to the college level drops drastically. I mean, very, very, very few kids get a scholarship to play a college sport. Then you take it a step further and go even at the farm leagues that are out there, that's even smaller. And then to get to a professional level is even that much smaller. But my point is, my son, he got the scholarship to play college basketball. He played college basketball for 2 years. And guess what? He was burned out. He said, Dad, he didn't see himself playing in the NBA. Okay. He was a 6'4", basically a 6'4" center is basically what he was, but he didn't see himself playing in the NBA. I never discouraged him or said he couldn't play in the NBA, but he just didn't see himself there. And he said, Dad, I am so tired. I'm burned out. I'm constantly either at the gym or I'm in the weight room with the team. I have no free time. I'm working on schoolwork. I'm just tired. I don't want to do it anymore. And I told him, I said, if you don't want to play basketball anymore, then don't play. Now, he told us that in the middle of his second season. I said, you do have to finish. You got to finish this season. You can't quit in the middle of a season. And he goes, no, I get that. Because that was my rule. You don't quit in the middle of a season. But I said, when you're done at the end of the season, that's fine. If you want to do something else or you're just tired of playing basketball, that's great. We'll move on to something else. I did say, you do have a scholarship. And if you're not going to play anymore, you're going to lose that scholarship. So we're probably going to have to move you to another school because we can't afford to continue to send you there. And so we switched his school.
People get caught up in that. They get caught up in the money and the end result and the pot of gold. But what they're forgetting is the journey is what you want to teach the kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's about accountability, character, winning, losing, all those skills. I just didn't learn in the NHL. I learned them along the journey,
right?
Because even when you make it, and how many guys make it and they make all the money and then they lose it, or they get an injury. Back when I played, a knee injury ended your career. It wasn't like it is today. You're back in 6 weeks. You're done. And it's what you learn, all the skills that we learn, that you learned being an athlete and your kids have learned. Dude, that is a Ivy League degree. That's how I look at it. Everything that I went to, people, they laugh, the school of hard knocks, because so many people say, but I essentially did. I learned. Right. I've lost a business. I went through everything, but it's not. I didn't. It was just one experiment after the next. But sports, I can't think of any other vessel to understanding life and what it takes. All of my business, even this new business I'm starting, I build a team. It's a hockey team, and it's a special. I have my power play, my penalty. I have people in those seats. People are like, put the right guy in the right seat. That's the same as hockey. You're putting your power play and your penalty killing unit together.
Yeah, I totally get it. So that was, essentially the case with my boy. And it was like, you know what, I'm good with that. You're not playing a sport to impress me. I've seen you play your whole life and I've enjoyed watching you play. And yes, if you want to continue playing, I'd love to continue watching you play. But if you don't want to play, I'm still your dad. I'm still your supporter. I'm still your number one fan. So don't worry about it, kid. We'll find something else for you to do. We'll find another passion for you to move into. Billy, this has been such a great conversation. We've gone on so long, but I want to ask you, can you tell my listeners the best place to look you up, find you, learn more about you, where they can pick up the book, all that kind of stuff for my listeners?
Yeah, no problem, Bryan. So billyhuard.com is my website. Purpose Worth Fighting For is my book, and you can pick it up on Amazon. There's a digital copy there, the Kindle book, and the paperback. The hard copy and the audio is going to be out in the next 2 weeks. I voiced over the audio because I didn't want anybody making mistakes on our Canadian slang. But yeah, and then I'm on all Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that. I do blogs on my website. Every month I'll put a blog up there. And this week I did a blog yesterday. I knew I was coming on this podcast, so I wanted to reach fathers. So I threw a blog up there.
I saw that. It's awesome. Well, cool. Listen, Billy, I am so glad that you and I have connected. I am absolutely looking forward to getting together one of these days, breaking bread and just hanging out and just growing the friendship, man. Because what you do and what you're doing now and the things that you represent completely align with my world. And I see us being friends for a long time. So I really appreciate you being on the show and sharing all of your experiences, my friend.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I just think this is such a great venue for kids, for folks to, just to listen to, and parents to understand, and fathers. I just think it's so great what you're doing. I truly love this. There should be more of this. And when you come here to my place, I'll throw you in that cold tub and we'll get you used to it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. I got to get me one of them things. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, brother. Listen, guys, you've just heard a phenomenal conversation with me and my good friend, Billy Huard. Make sure you guys are checking out his website. Make sure you guys are picking up the book. The guy's amazing and he knows what he's talking about. His story is so impactful. It will help you navigate not only your challenges in your life, but also the challenges of maybe life in general with your family, your kids, all those areas. So make sure you guys check it out. And also, as always, I say this every single week, but if you have not yet subscribed to my show yet, I don't know why, because I have awesome guests like Billy on each and every week. And I don't want you to miss it because it's going to help you level up as a parent. It's going to help you level up as a person. And if it's not, I promise you it will. So make sure you guys are subscribing to my show so you don't miss any of the awesome guests. And as always, I look forward to seeing you each and every week on Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at Dad Up Podcast. Until next time, everyone, Dad Up.